Greetings to everyone. My name is Sibusiso, Mashiloane. It is indeed a pleasure to be here and to do the work that I've always wanted to do, or not to do the presentation that I've always wanted to do. I must admit I've been scared of doing it because looking at the personnel or the person who has actually invested his lifetime working on the topic that I'm actually presenting tonight. I'm using the word presenting because I don't want it to be seen as, or not to be assumed as performance, but maybe a presentation that is also an inquiry, in that as I perform or as I present, I'm also going to be listening to the direction of the music, so in that way the music or the presentation is not fixed, because it also functions as a site of research that I can then look back to it and say, hey, why did I make that decision? Why did I play that note and omitted that particular note instead of the other one? Because then it becomes then a theory in practice, and which informs the attitude of wanting to sound whole. So before the performance, I would like just to briefly share the thinking behind the presentation, which is titled Sounding Home, a practice-based dialogue with Bheki Mseleku's musical cycles. The presentation emerges from my broader search into what I describe as sounds of home. The idea that sounds carries memory, it carries identity, it carries forms of belonging and a lived experience. And this understanding home is not only a geographical site, it is something embodied and sounded through music. Sound becomes a way of remembering people, culture, tradition, movement, language, and a community life. As I argue in my research, sound possesses homing qualities. That is the power of sound, in that it recalls place, lived experiences through the vibration and the feeling. The focus of this presentation is Bheki Mseleku, one of South Africa's most profound musical thinkers and pianists. My engagement with Bheki Mseleku in both scholarly and deeply personal, I first encountered his presence while studying at Natal Technical in 2003 through also my former lecturer, who is actually here in the audience, Mr. Neil Gonzalez. Although he did not formally teach me, he became an important figure among students, particularly through the approach of his music making. One of the most significant things I learned from Mseleku was that music was never separate from life. For him, music was not merely technique, harmony, or performance. It was spiritual practice, consciousness, and a way of understanding existence. Often described himself as a medium, suggesting that music was something channeled through him and rather than possessed by him. The spiritual orientation shaped his perception of home. Unlike many conventional understanding of home as a fixed geography, Mseleku's conception was cosmological and expansive. Even during his exile times, he resisted defining himself as purely through nationalism or territory. Rather, home became a state of spiritual alignment and human consciousness. Yet, despite the universality, his music remained deeply rooted in South African sonic sensibilities. This is where my inquiry begins. Music scholarship, or my scholarship on South African jazz, often frames the music as a rhythm, melody, rich harmonically. However, When listening closely to Mseleku's compositions, one encounters highly sophisticated harmonic movement, particularly extended and cyclical harmonic structures. My research specifically investigates how Bheki Mseleku constructs and marries these harmonic and melodic cycles while simultaneously retaining a distinctive South African musical identity. I'm interested in how he negotiates complexity without losing the feeling of home in the music. For example, while scholars such as Andrew Lee and Shakra identify the presence of diminished access, augmented, a whole tone harmonic cycles in Mseleku's music or compositions, my concern extends beyond the harmonic analysis. I ask, how does these harmonic cycles sound South African? What indigenous rhythmic melodies, resources inform them? How do locality and lived experience shape the music? This is particularly important because Mseleku's music carries traces of multiple South African sounds. He comes from the same land of KwaZulu. So Zulu Ngoma tradition, chants and dance are in the music. Big musical and rhythmic influences are there. He even wrote Mamelodi, which cites the location where the majority of the Bheki people are. Township groups, sensibilities, and local church musics are in Bheki Mseleku's perception of music. These elements are not decorative additions. They are intrinsic to the logic of the music itself. The performance tonight is therefore not simply a recital of compositions. It is a practice-based inquiry in which performance itself becomes the research method. In other words, knowledge is produced through the act of musicking, the doing itself, performing, feeling, improvising, and embodying the music. And a big thank you to my supervisor or former supervisor who actually helped me with the framing of this thought, sounding home, and she is here, Dr. Olsen. I'm saying this while reading this paragraph because she's like, man, it's always been the doing. It's in the doing that you actually abstract the theories and the methodologies that you need. It's in the doing of the sound. So, which actually inspired me to continue to pursue this sounding home, but through the doing and then later reflect on what I've done. So I'm always then in a position of being a researcher and me myself researching myself, you know. So this approach is important because some aspects of South African jazz cannot be fully captured through notation or written analysis alone. While I'm saying this, I am planning to release a book in September this year, which is a citation of my 60 compositions that I've written that are intended to be part of the teaching and learning of the sounds of home. That's deserving of applause. So the groove, the feeling, and the sense of communal movement and the relationship between the rhythm and spirituality often exists beyond the textual explanation. As Mseleku's music repeatedly demonstrates, knowledge is often carried more profoundly in sound than in speech. So tonight you will be hearing, because I'm not gonna interrupt the flow of the music because I'm the site of research as well. So I'm not gonna interrupt the music, so I'll just play through the repertoire. And the first song that I'm gonna start with is perhaps, I don't know, I will see. But the entire program is gonna have his song titled Aja. Second song is gonna be titled Cycles, followed by Echoes of the Wind or the Winds of Truth, Meditation Movements, Melancholy in Cologne, The Age of the Divine Mother, and Violet Flame. These works are approached not as isolated compositions, but as interconnected states of being, cycling of invocations, displacements, spirituality, transformations, and return. You will also hear me incorporating the leg rattle. As part of the performance, for me, this is not simply an additional of texture or percussion. It is part of grounding the body within the rhythm and reconnecting sound to movement, ritual, indigenous modes of musicking. Ultimately, this presentation asks us to listen and participate differently, not only for harmony, not only for virtuosity, but for how sound itself becomes a site of belonging. Thank you.